Hello, and welcome to Feel No Shame, a podcast created to normalise conversations around the subject of suicide. The Feel No Shame podcast does not endorse or encourage suicidal behaviours or deliberate self-harm. Instead, we promote open and safe discussion around suicidal thoughts and feelings, as well as how to manage them. If you are affected by anything we talk about on today's podcast and feel like you need somebody to speak to, please call the Samaritans any day, any time on 116 123. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please email feelnoshamepod@gmail.com or follow Feel No Shame Pod on Instagram and Facebook. Take care and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Feel No Shame podcast with me, Rowan Long.
And me, Alan Aldersley Byrne, a very long-winded posh surname.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. We are discussing a trauma-informed practice, trauma-informed ways of approaching suicidal feelings and of supporting a person who may be experiencing suicidal feelings. But before that, we'll do some quick intros because this is the first episode of Series 1 of Feel No Shame. How are you feeling, Alan?
I'm good. How are you feeling, Rowan?
I'm feeling good as well. I've realised that my heater is too hot, so I'm going to bend down slightly, turn it off, and I'm back.
It's a lovely backdrop, by the way. It's a lovely.
Well,
backdrop.
this is a summer house that I work in. So as you know, but the listeners may not know, I'm a counsellor. I'm a therapist, and I work out here in my summer house. In the pandemic, it's all been Zoom sessions out here. I used to have people in here, but it's very, very small. So this has been turned into a Zoom room. But yeah, it's a nice colour. It's yellow. It's calming. There's this big photograph here of a flower with a bee on it, which I took. But that's going to be changed soon as well. I like to change things around in here, but it does look nice. It's not a shed. It's a summer house.
Maybe we could do a feature every episode where you change things around and people have to think, oh, what's he changed? And then they win a pen. Maybe.
Well, funny you should mention. I've lost a pen in here somewhere, so that could also be a mini game in this podcast series. Somebody help me find my pen in an 8x8 summer house because I can't find it.
You'll get all the web sleuths all over you, you know. But
I tell you what, I won't change in here though, Al.
What?
That's my non-judgmental, warm and compassionate way of looking at suicidal feelings. That's what this podcast is going to be all about. But do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, absolutely. Hi everyone. I'm Al. In my bio, it sounds a bit sort of not pandemic-y, but in my biography on the Feel No Shame social media atmosphere or arena, where are you putting the bio, by the way? Is it just on social media?
Feel No Shame Pod, yeah, at Feel No Shame Pod. Search for that on Facebook or Instagram, and we're on there.
Brilliant. Yeah, just saying, I don't like Alan. I mean, that's my formal name. So you can call me Al, as Simon and Garfunkel once said, or just Paul Simon. It was just Paul Simon with a cameo by Chevy Chase. Anyway, the whole point of me being here is to get involved with you're my best friend, and ultimately I want to help. I know how to edit to some sort of extent, and I want to, as it says in my bio, I want to help bridge the light and the dark, because these conversations are going to be, we are going to go down a path, but we want to raise awareness that it's okay to go down that path. It's okay to have those thoughts and feelings, but it's also important to talk about them when and wherever you can. So I'm here because I like to edit, I like to help my friends, and just in general, I like to talk and listen. So bring it on. Looking forward to it.
You are hired. I will send the other ones away. They weren't very good anyway. So yeah, you're hired. You're definitely in. And we both work with people in different capacities who may be experiencing suicidal thoughts or have experienced suicidal thoughts. And I don't know about you, but for me, there can be a huge amount of shame involved when people are talking to me about their suicidal thoughts. Without going too much into myself, when I've had suicidal thoughts in the past, I felt a huge degree of shame, massive, which kept me from talking about it with anyone really, until it got to some really desperate times when there was no choice but to talk about it.
Yeah.
But since then, I've been on a journey, Al. I've been on a journey, and I found out. I stopped doing that voice now. I've been on a
Oh,
journey,
don't.
and
I
I
like
found
it. I like it.
I found out that there are ways to take the shame out, and that suicidal feelings are a lot more normal than people may think,
Mm,
and the stigma attached doesn't help at all. Um, the kind of panic and worry that is a natural offshoot of somebody mentioning suicidal thoughts doesn't really help at all. So we're here to try and take some of the shame out. We want
yeah.
to hear people tell their stories, not necessarily about the triggers or about the ins and outs of their suicidal feelings, their behaviors, their actions, but we want to hear the stories behind the feelings.
Yeah.
And today's episode, we'll be looking at what may happen to lead a person to have suicidal feelings in the future. We're going to be looking at trauma informed practice and adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
It sounds weird, but I love adverse childhood experiences, comma, researching, if that makes sense. I like researching adverse childhood experiences. I don't like the experiences themselves, they're adverse. But for me, again, finding out that adverse childhood experiences exist and can lead to stuff later in life just makes a lot of sense and helps create a narrative that makes sense. Takes the shame away, takes the blame away. There's a whole lot of hard work, but very, very fulfilling once you get into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I'll be more than happy to offer my insight, if you can call it that. Being a champion of thriving from trauma. Um, not thriving off it, but using it as an advocate into your daily routine. Why you would experience it, how you can develop it, and just understanding it, and why in the past it's potentially been a cause of concern, which then could lead to potential thoughts, dark thoughts, suicidal thoughts as well. But yeah, you just tell me what you want to know, Ro, and I'll do what I can. But yeah, just looking forward to starting the episode off, and get going.
Let's go.
Yeah.
So, what we would normally do on one of these episodes is we'd have a guest. So, we've
Yeah.
got some guests lined up, and they're ordinary people with extraordinary tales, but a whole lot of
There's a song
wealth
there,
of
isn't
it.
there? It is ordinary people. Anyway, yeah.
Someone turn that radio off. We're recording. So yeah, we've got some people who not only have stories to tell, but also have a lot of experience and knowledge to share, which have come partly from those stories. So that would be very interesting. Stay tuned, kids. But for today, we have another interesting guest, and his name is you, because we we both work in a trauma informed way. But sometimes trauma doesn't come into my sessions, and sometimes suicidal thoughts don't come into my sessions. Whereas you tend to work in quite a heavy way, and you may have more experience of this. So if you're happy to explain more about trauma informed practice, adverse childhood experiences, everything that comes with it, I'll chip in every now and again. Um, I'll keep moving so that you don't think that my stream is buffering or anything like that. Um, let's do that. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Absolutely fine. Yeah. So from my experience working in the job that I'm in, it's every day. I might not experience it, but I know that victims, as well as people that come to assist, they will see potentially trauma every day. Um, the way I see trauma informed practice is that with trauma, it can be caused by toxic stress, which can, and the way I look at it is, and this will be great for the video, but not great for the audio side of things. But if you can picture your fist or your hand, and you wrap your thumb into your palm, and then cover your thumb with your four fingers, that is potentially your frontal lobe. That's the core area of where you function, your animalistic side of the brain as well. And, and if anyone wants to debate on that when they listen or see it, please feel free to have a chat, and we'll talk about it. But this is how I look at it and easily regulate what trauma informed practice is, and how an adverse experience helps with this sort of demo. But when you're in that situation and toxic stress is all around, memories, the feelings of those memories, the you're not able to potentially regulate the stress that's about to happen. So what then has to happen is that the chemical imbalance in the brain then flips. And your frontal lobe is there, and there's nowhere to comfort it. It goes all over
Alan
the
has
place.
opened his palm.
Yes, thank you for the audio description. So that's what's known as flipping your lid. So the lid covers the frontal lobe, and once that is lifted, you're open to the elements, and you might not be able at that point able to understand what actions may affect others. So if you do something, you're not in that right frame, you won't be able to regulate how others may perceive it. You possibly won't be able to interpret other people's behaviors accurately as well. And that is all about toxic stress from potentially adverse childhood experiences that have happened in the past, such as abuse, such as poor nutrition, poor loving, anything that has been surrounded.
Neglect.
That's exactly it. But with being up to a skill level, knowing about trauma informed practice, it can help you as a practitioner, and as someone working with young people or anyone, any demographic. It can help you to be compassionate and understand that their behaviors are indicators of past trauma. So if they do 1 minute start chatting, and then all of a sudden they flip, you can understand, okay, this is normal. It can adapt. It can actually help you adapt your practice, and it can potentially ease the trauma because you're able to understand it. You're able to know potentially certain triggers, and it can then reduce further trauma throughout your discussions with said person or persons. So it's all about, I feel it's all about damage limitation. If you see something happening that is traumatic, you learn from it, and you're able to then, inside your mind, able to process it potentially once you're aware of certain research. So certainly from me, this is how I do it with the fist. And whenever I get into a stressful situation at work or at home, where I've got a near 4-year-old running around screaming, shouting at the top of his voice, I've only had X amount of hours of sleep, I then can retract back and go, okay, how did I learn from an experience in the past where I got angry, or I should have I should have calmed myself, I should have taken myself away into the kitchen or looked at my anything like that. It's all about processing in your own mind about how you don't need to go down that road again. Okay, and it's easy saying it, but I think with trauma informed practice, it's just about reassessing constantly, reassessing you as a person to see, okay, I'm in a place now where my lid is not flipped. What made me get to that point? Why do I have to go to that point again? So that's something that, in a soundbite I can potentially mention about it. But it's all about identifying triggers as well. It's identifying potential smells. It's identifying potential areas where you'll be talking to a person. Do they like talking to male or female members of society? It's all about how you work with that person, okay? Because everyone is different, and if you're discussing certain things and they're not comfortable, you reassess that and you turn it into another activity or something else that will keep them on side, if that makes sense. But it's all about just not shocking anymore. And that, for me, I think for me, the shock treatment and the shock value, yes, it works sometimes, but on the whole, I think we don't want to upset, or we don't want to scare, because
Mm.
scaring people, for me, it's only a short-term fix. The
If
the
that.
exactly, yeah. I just use a simple example of the adverts on the telly. If you hit me at 30, there's a certain percentage, and you see the young girl, cold as ice, dead on the floor, and then all of a sudden she's awake because the car has slowed down to 20 miles an hour. There's a time and a place for it, but I certainly feel as though we need to educate rather than just whack something on the screen and go, look at this. This is meant to scare you. I don't like that.
Mm. Mm.
So it's all about research, education, constant education, and I think personally, a lot of partner agencies, a lot of agencies that are local and national are waking up to that.
Mm.
Um, but that's my 2 cents on the matter. There you go.
Yeah, and to bring it back to the identification of the triggers.
Yeah,
So if we bring suicidal thoughts in, identifying the
absolutely.
triggers is of vital importance, because
Yeah,
otherwise, um, a person is constantly flipping between not feeling suicidal and feeling suicidal, and with no awareness as to why that may be happening.
it could be.
That
Yeah,
can cause a multitude of problems. They could be putting themselves in harm's way every time they approach a certain street, or talk to a certain person, or if that person represents something. If they're talking to a man with a beard, that could cause those feelings over and over again. And if they don't know that that is a trigger, um, like I mentioned before, not only are they putting themselves continually in harm's way, but also again that sense of shame comes in. Why am I feeling this way? Why do I feel so awful for no reason?
yeah.
And the answer is there is a reason, but maybe that's outside of that person's awareness, or it's so buried in the subconscious that it is
That's
not
something
able to be reached.
I was gonna highlight that, row, because it is the I mean, this is big words are coming out now, but it's the desensitization, the
Mm.
unconscious process that
Mm.
happens with interactions with other people, and th- they're doing it without knowing they're doing it, as
Mm.
as you just mentioned, and those certain triggers need to. It's going down the rabbit hole,
Mm.
but that's why it's essential that we have people that we can confide in, people that we can talk to, people that we
Mm.
can that people trusted adults, or indeed trusted mentors, really.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm just really happy that, again, a lot of agencies are waking up to it.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the realization that just telling somebody to stop feeling something or
Yeah.
stop doing something that they are relying upon, that doesn't work.
Okay.
Because either
How
they stop
how
doing
can
it
I?
and replace it with they stop doing it and replace it with something else,
Yeah.
or you tell them to stop and they say no, and then they never talk to you ever again. Quite rightly, because you haven't entered into their world. You've tried to drag them into yours without trying to find out why they do what they do, or why they feel what they feel, or why they think what they think. That seems to be a bit of a paradigm shift, it sounds like.
Yeah. And the way I see it is, stop drinking. Okay, what do you want me to do now? I don't know, but stop drinking. Okay, I'll just take drugs then. So it's that mantra.
Mm.
So yeah, fully agreeing with what you're saying. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
And I should mention as well, there's a wonderful book by a man called Pete Walker. We can put the link to this somewhere, probably on the YouTube description, but we'll put it on the social media when this episode
Yeah.
comes out as well. A book by Pete Walker called Complex PTSD: From Surviving to Thriving. And complex PTSD isn't so much a diagnosis at all, but it does explain very well what somebody might be going through if they have experienced toxic
Hmm.
stress,
Yeah.
particularly whilst growing up. Um, and complex PTSD is more like a collection of symptoms, experiences, memories, thoughts, feelings. But what he does explain in there is a concept called emotional flashbacks, which is something that my clients will ask me about, without necessarily knowing the name, where you suddenly just feel awful, just seemingly out of nowhere, You might be thinking certain things. You might feel those intense suicidal thoughts where you just want to escape yourself at that point. And there's no obvious cues or triggers, but emotional flashbacks can come from literally the smallest of cues and triggers. So if you're walking around the supermarket, mask on, but you catch a sort of a scent of a checkout person's perfume, and it reminds you of the perfume that your auntie was wearing when she was berating you when you were 6 years old. That will be completely out of the subconscious, but the body remembers. There's another really good book I'm going to mention in a bit. But the body remembers, and it sends those same cues, those same signals up to the brain to tell you that you're in imminent danger. You're going to be berated by your auntie again. You're going to feel like you're terrified. You're going to feel like you're experiencing intense fear and that you just cannot escape, even if you're a 34-year-old man in a supermarket, for example. So you're not 6 years old being berated by your auntie, but your brain thinks that you are. And along with those feelings can come that feeling of just wanting to escape. And if there is no escape from yourself, that's where the suicidal feelings can sometimes come in. But we'll come on to that.
Doesn't it remind you? And I know we're going. Well, I'm taking this a little bit off tangent, but it's just again triggered a memory. But the film Inside Out is an absolutely fantastic example of how it's not just a simple emotion every time. You can blend those emotions to have happiness and sadness together. And even in that film, if anyone hasn't watched it, yes, it is an animation, but I think it's a beautiful film that actually describes the human condition in general. And as we grow and as we develop, it's okay to feel happy and sad at the same time, and the emotions blend. But we as human beings are not born able to regulate stress. We're not able to regulate anything. We develop that as we get cared for, as we get put on this coil by other self-regulated adults. So it's making sure that if we can identify it at the earliest possibility, at the earliest avenue, it can potentially stop traumatic experience. I mean, we'll never stop it in general. We'll never be able to do, stop it completely. But we can assist with preventing the trauma, the trauma that potentially children should never have to experience. But if we can identify as podcasters, as counselors, as people working for services that for public, if we can identify it at the earliest opportunity, then we can take them away from it and then show them what is on the other side. But just from what you just said there, Ro, just Inside Out just reminds me of how, we see a vision, a golden memory or a horrible memory, and it's shown. And it could be, as you say, 34, but you're viewing it as a 6-year-old and you regress back to that time. But it's just, again, it's just making sure we can regulate that. And how do we regulate it? It's through trauma-informed practice. So yeah.
And with probably very good reason, Inside Out features the basic emotions because it's fundamentally a children's film. But I agree with you; it's wonderful. It's incredible, and it perfectly aligns with a style, a method of therapy named internal family systems, which deals with psychological parts. So psychological parts which develop as adaptations because they feel like they are needed. So I'm in podcaster mode now. So I have a podcaster part which has suddenly burst forth from nowhere. And I don't think I speak like this in real life. I think my voice will revert back to a normal voice at some point.
I want you to carry on like this, whenever we meet up.
The podcaster part has adapted and thought, he needs me. I need to be present for this podcast. And it's doing an okay job, hopefully. It's taken the seat somewhat. But what Inside Out doesn't mention is that for some of us, there will be a suicidal part or a nihilistic part that develops at some point. And again, it doesn't just develop as a joke. It's not just there for no reason. It has developed and been created because it feels like it's needed. So I'm going to stick with this 6-year-old being berated by an auntie. Yeah. So this isn't anything that happened to me. I don't think it's anything that happened to you, but it's something that may happen to some people. And to some people, I should point out as well, if anybody is triggered by anything that we mention in here, please feel free to get in touch with us on feelnoshamepod@gmail.com.
And indeed,
But
numbers
hopefully,
and contacts will be at the end and at the beginning and end of the podcast.
yeah, but hopefully I can pick just creative examples that don't have a lot of relevance
Disclaimer.
to anyone. Yeah. But let's say there's a 6-year-old being berated by their auntie. They can't get out. They can't get away. There's this big adult screaming in this little child's face. That little child may develop a suicidal part, or a part that has suicidal feelings. So the way I like to think of it is that if you're in a room and there's 2 doors, and suddenly the room is on fire and you can't see any other way out. One of these doors is locked, the other door says suicide or escape. Your options are to either just sit and wait that fire out, so to sit there and take that auntie's horrific treatment just in the face and hope that your body can deal with it, and hope that the abuse ends at some point, and hope that you can then continue on with your life. Or this door appears next to the locked door that says suicide. If you escape this, you escape the abuse. And that part develops because it feels like it's doing you a favor. It feels like it's exhausted all other possibilities. There is no other way out. This room is on fire. You were going to die anyway, so let's just escape now. And obviously it's not a good door to go through at all. Nobody knows what is the other side, and once you go through that door, there is no coming back. So that door is absolutely not recommended. But that part that develops at that point genuinely believes that that is the only option to keep that person safe. There's a cruel irony to it because you won't be safe. But it's a question of, I want this abuse to end right now. I can only think of one way to make this abuse end right now. Obviously, as mentioned before, that isn't on Inside Out. But that is a part that develops and sits alongside the happy part, the sad part, the angry part, the podcaster part, the football fan part. Not everybody has that part. Some people do, but that part is entirely normal, and that part is an adaptation to a very extreme example. It is an ordinary reaction to an extraordinary situation.
And the whole point of this podcast is to basically say, at that point, it's okay to have those thoughts. It is okay to have those thoughts.
Yeah, it's when the thoughts turn into actions and behaviors, that's where
exactly.
there's an issue. But ideally, talking to somebody or listening to somebody when they're having those thoughts can go some way to preventing the behaviors and the actions.
Yeah.
So if we double back to the adverse childhood experiences, Alan, can you tell me what they are?
I can give you 10 of them because it varies, because it can take, they come in many forms. ACEs is what we call them in
Yeah.
the work that we do. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. They're not ACE, they're rubbish, but they do come in many forms, from the physical side to the mental side of abuse, neglect, and any form of dysfunction within the house where you live. Okay, but you've got
It doesn't
physical.
always have to
Yeah.
be physical. That's a really good
No,
point. It can be bullying,
exactly.
it can be harsh words, it can be cruel treatment, but it doesn't always have to be physical.
No. The abuse. I mean, I will talk about the abuse side being it physical, but emotional, and unfortunately, in some cases, sexual. Neglect, where you don't give the physical, or the child has not received physical love, or a hug or a kiss or any form of care from their parents, or from their adults. The emotional neglect as well, where the bullying comes in, the gaslighting, example of, oh, you'll never be good enough, or you'll never be able to get to where you are. That comes into play. The dysfunction in the household, though, that can stem from incarceration, where we've seen, the likes of Joseph Fritzl, but that was incarceration within the home. People suffering domestic abuse inside the home, where they are either drugged, or they are suffering from drug addiction or alcoholism. Even even in the terms of parents going through a divorce,
Mm,
that can be an adverse child experience, because the child may believe my stable family is breaking up.
mm,
And we've seen it in the films. Oh, we get two Christmases, yeah, or two birthdays, yeah. That's
mm,
that's the way of coping. That's the way
mm,
of trying to release that stress. But the fact that if you're a child as well and seeing the parent being beaten or hurt or being treated in a violent way, that can be a child experience, an adverse child experience, which then causes issues with mental health.
mhm,
Is this the way a household should be? Is this the way a family should live? Obviously, I don't think so. But as I say,
mhm,
the main those are the main triggers of adverse childhood experiences. And again, that results to toxic stress. It affects the mind and body of
mhm,
children, and that then to them can then become a normality. This is how things are. This is how things should be. And then
mm,
that follows them into adult life, which then interrupts their building of social skills. It deters their potential resilience. And if they don't get that nurturing at a young age, you've taken away certain foundations
mm.
for adult life. So hopefully that's answered it for you, Ro,
And
in my eyes.
yes, and it emphasizes the point that uh, that hypothetical person you just described from
Yes,
childhood to adulthood, their childhood aces will then influence their own children, who may
absolutely.
then pick up aces, who will then go on to be adults and have their own children, and their aces influence their aces, and it's this one big horrible ace
Cycle.
chain.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
um, and uh, there's a website. I'll mention a website here as well. A website named Aces Too High,
Mhm.
which has the ACE questionnaire, which is only 10 questions,
Give
and
it a
they are
go.
10 questions based around before the age of 18. Did this happen to you? Did you see this,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
Yeah.
There's also a resilience test on there, which I know you're more familiar with. So I
Uh-huh.
sometimes used the ACE questionnaire with my clients. You'll use the resilience questionnaire with the people you work with
Yes.
sometimes. But
Yes.
but basically, for every yes that you answer of those 10 questions, you get 1 point, and at the end, you get a score out of 10. And there are some graphs on this website, some bar charts,
We love
which
a graph. Love a
they're
graph.
quite scary actually. So they do look nice, but once you start looking into them, you realize they're not nice at all, because as the ACE score increases, so too does the likelihood of adulthood depression, alcoholism, drug
Which then
abuse,
leads to those thoughts of
mhm,
suicide. So yeah.
domestic abuse, perpetrating domestic abuse comes into it, even stuff like further sexual abuse,
Hmm.
teenage pregnancy, all these, well, chronic anxiety, some health conditions as well. COPD can be caused by a high, well, not so much by the high A score, but the way of coping with a high A score may be smoking. Smoking can then lead to COPD or lung cancer, and there's just a whole host of health concerns that come up if a person has a high A score. And here's a staggering statistic for you, Alan.
You got the
Um,
word, but well done.
just about. I'm so flustered by this statistic, because if you get a score of 4 or above on the ACE test, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, you are 1,220% more likely to attempt suicide at some point in your life than if you got a score of 3 or below on the ACE score, on the ACE questionnaire. And once you see that figure, you can kind of, well, your mind can be blown a little bit. But if we come back a little bit and look at it from outside, it makes sense that for somebody who has been through 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, that at some point in their life they would feel so overwhelmed, so dysregulated, so emotionally dysregulated, um, perhaps so unable to talk about what they've gone through, unable to find anybody to listen to them, or anybody they feel comfortable trusting. Because again, if you've been through adverse childhood experiences, you're very unlikely to want to trust anybody. It makes sense that at some point, again, that suicidal part that we mentioned using the Inside Out film um, would creep into view and say, I know a way out of this life.
Hmm.
I know a way that you can shuffle off this mortal coil and make all the pain go away. And again, it's understandable why that part would be so tempting and um, would be like the snake in the Little Prince, just to give another fairly obscure literary reference. But again, well, as a counsellor, I feel like it's my duty at this point and my responsibility to look everybody directly in the eye or ears, because it's a podcast, and just say that there is another way out,
Yeah.
and it doesn't always have to be like that. Just because you've gone through adverse childhood experiences doesn't mean that your life is written off. And if you take a look at that website, ACE is too high, take a look at those bar charts, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you get a score of 4 and above, you're going to attempt suicide, you're going to be an alcoholic, you're going to abuse drugs. It's just about the likelihood. But again, I think, like you mentioned way back at the start, once you start noticing these things, once you start noticing these triggers, but also once you start noticing your aces, and once you start saying, hang on a second, maybe the reason why you keep getting into self-destructive relationships is because of a relationship you were in when you were 13 with somebody older, perhaps. And once you start developing that narrative, you start taking the blame away from yourself. You start hopefully eradicating some of the shame away from yourself. And it's not about pointing fingers per se. It's not about saying, well, I feel suicidal because I had awful parents, because I don't know, maybe that can be a healthy way of coping, but it doesn't always have to be about attributing blame to anybody. It can
Yeah.
just be a case of, I went through all this stuff when I was a kid, and look at me now. Look at how I've coped. Look at how well I've actually done considering what I've been through. I've conquered my adversity, and now I can move on. And I make that sound so simple. It's a very hard process, but here we go then now. So I've got my aces. I understand my triggers. I felt suicidal. What do I do?
For me, it's acknowledging that these are these are coping strategies, these are coping mechanisms. But I'm not. I'm going to play a bit of tennis with you, Ro.
Okay.
What do you want to do? You've identified these issues. You've identified the the childhood experiences that have triggered these thoughts and feelings. What you say? What do I do? But what it, it's just repeating the question. It really
You
is. It's
you
what
say,
do
what
you
do
want
I
to do?
do? What do you do?
Yeah,
What do you do? You say what? I don't
very
know where
good.
that
I
voice
like
came
it.
from either.
That
Well,
that's staying in.
what I,
That's staying in.
what I did, Al, what I actually did. So I'm happy to talk briefly about this. But what I actually did once I discovered I had a few aces under my belt. I've never met anybody that hasn't got any aces, by
Oh,
the
I've
way.
got aces. I'm
Um,
not up to my eyeballs, but I've got a couple of aces. Back in the day, um, where I wanted to please everyone. I wanted to make sure. Oh, I want to make everyone happy. I want to make sure everyone around me is happy and they like me and they love me. So I'm going to tell them anything they want to hear, whether it was a
it's the
lie
aces
or a truth.
influencing your behaviors.
Yeah, yeah, and I identified that very quickly into my relationship with my now wife, who basically said, "Why are you acting as if you need to please everyone?"
Mm,
And that for me was a wake up call where I said, "Right, take me as I am. You either love me or hate me." And not in the I'm like Marmite. Ugh. I'm not. I do like Marmite, but um, you you can't please everyone. That was the ultimate conclusion. And try as you might, if they don't want your time, you don't spend the time wisely with them. But that was an ace, definitely for me. As
mm.
a just as a quick example. But what you've asked me what do I do, but what do you want to do?
Yeah, so well, what I did, mentioning Marmite, by the way, there's a new Marmite with chili. Have you seen that? I haven't
No.
tried it, but
Oh.
there we go. What I actually did was well, I let it overwhelm me, which isn't the best idea. So I didn't know my aces until late on, and then once I was kind of down in the pit, there was nothing else to do but examine the aces, and then I took them to therapy, And this isn't just one big advert. This isn't me saying, therapy is great. That's the whole point of the podcast. But it will be a recurring theme because it is great. It's really, really hard. It's really, really difficult. And particularly if you aren't aware of any aces
Yeah.
and you aren't aware of your triggers, it can be a real shock to the system in looking back and finding them and rewriting the narrative. And someone actually said to me that the healing hurts more than the break sometimes, and that's definitely the case sometimes. But once you're healed or healing, maybe nobody can ever truly be 100% healed, but once you're healing and once you're in a better position than when you started therapy, for example, it feels so good. You
Oh,
can
yeah.
acknowledge the aces without them overwhelming you, and you can acknowledge the aces without them influencing your behaviors to such an extent as they were before. So that was what I did anyway. So I would recommend that to anybody who's down with therapy. Um, Compassion. Here's another word that I'll mention every
Yes.
single week. Hopefully, compassion, self-compassion, particularly to to some extent, if the possibility is there, compassion for people who have inflicted aces sometimes. So that isn't always a given because if somebody has deliberately inflicted an ace, if somebody has deliberately inflicted malice and deliberate harm upon somebody, that's going to take a whole load of forgiveness. And I wouldn't say that's obligatory at all. But if you can see that the people inflicting aces were just trying their best with what they had at the time. Maybe they were emotionally dysregulated. Maybe they weren't aware of their triggers. And it's really hard. It's a really hard ask to look somebody in the face, look a bully in the face and say,
Yeah.
I forgive you, I love you. But compassion is a really powerful thing. But let's stick with self-compassion for now, because self-compassion is is a great thing too. It's where you look at yourself and you say, yes, I've been through all this stuff. I've been through the worst things that anybody can ever imagine, and I've blamed myself for so long. And now I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at myself as if I was a child. I'm going to kind of use the power of imagination and put that child version of myself in front of myself, get down to his or her level, just hold him gently on the shoulders and say, it's not your fault. I love you. It's not your fault.
A
Something
beautiful
along those
image.
lines.
Beautiful
And
image of you holding you. Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes that's what we have to do. It's a concept called reparenting, which is probably a tale for another time as well, but where we learn to look after ourselves the way that we weren't perhaps looked after when we were younger.
Mm.
Um, so therapy, compassion, overall kindness, that's good too. So just because you were done unto doesn't mean that you need to do unto others.
Mm.
If you can break those patterns that we mentioned beforehand, if you can break those cycles, if you can be different to what you have been programmed to be, then that there's an almighty shift there in terms of a settled feeling within yourself and overall happiness. I think you mentioned as well just hanging out with the right people. So
Yeah.
hanging out with people who won't see you for your aces, or perhaps have an understanding as to why you do certain things. So they're not going to beat you up every time you uh, have a cigarette when you've said that you've quit, for example. They're not going to beat you up. They're going to understand why you're doing what you're doing. They're not exactly going to give you a free pass every time, but they're not going to drag you down, and they're not going to be another attacker to somebody who's had a history of attackers. They'll get you to hold your hands up, take responsibility, but not
Yeah.
feel shame. Just feel guilt. Guilt and
And
shame are two different things.
this is where I think, and this is a great example again, it's just triggered another memory. But for me and you as friends, I think it really set the precedent for how. I mean, this is from me. I mean, you might
Mm,
feel differently, but the bond grew stronger when we were at a wedding. One of our two of our good friends got married, and I saw a different side to you because you opened up about things that you never really talked about,
mm,
before, and I felt honored that you got to that point where you were able to confide in me because, wow, okay, that's, uh, it was horrible to hear certain things, but I thought, wow, you've got to a point where you're able to talk to me about them, and I thought,
mm.
wow, okay, I, I, I'm in a very, privileged place, and that was, your contribution to me helped me open up towards you. So it's the two factors there, the contributing factor of opening up and understanding, opening and understanding.
It does
Which,
start off a chain. We were closed up like a couple of old clams, Al, and then we
we
showed each other our pearls.
yeah, that's for another episode, but
Yeah,
no.
but it is. Yeah, it is, and particularly with to bring it back to suicidal feeling.
Yeah.
If you find somebody, if you're fortunate enough to find somebody or somebodies to
You
to
may
open
need
up about
somebody to
something that might be
turn
your
off that
deepest
radio.
something that might be your deepest, darkest feeling. If you can find somebody that you feel comfortable saying, you know what, I'm feeling quite suicidal today, or I'm feeling like I don't want to live anymore. If you can find that person who looks back at you and says, tell me more, or I'm really sorry to hear that. Do you want to talk about it? It's somebody who you know that you can share more and more with. Then it also sets a little template in that listener, so that when that listener wants to speak to somebody, maybe they reciprocate to that person or they speak to somebody else, but they feel like, okay, so I reacted to that person's suicidal thoughts in that way, maybe this person will react in the same way. I would really like that. And you can also caveat that conversation and say, if I were to speak to you about certain things, I'd really appreciate it if you'd respond in this way. And then you have this big old tin cans on strings chain of people just talking about stuff, which, I mean, talking about stuff takes the power out of the feelings a lot of the time, particularly if the person responding responds in a kind, compassionate, gentle, understanding, non-judgmental way. And that doesn't just have to be a counselor, that can be a friend, that can be a family member, that can
It could be
be
a youth club. It could be a youth club of all places, where you decide where things go.
mm,
Bean bags instead of chairs.
mm,
Table football instead of a television, or all these factors come into
mm,
play to create that non-toxic environment. And indeed, what you've just said, the compassion needs to be there for first and foremost.
mm.
But I feel enlightened. I really do. And I'm not just saying that. I feel really enlightened today about this. I've been looking forward to doing it. And the conversations, I think, have exploded tonight, which has been brilliant. Um, yeah. Uh, what do we
Yeah,
do?
it's probably, well, should we reveal that we haven't planned too much about this first episode?
No.
I've got 5 bullet points. The last one, instead of putting why is it important to normalize feelings, I've put why is it important to normalize feelings. So that is the level of prep. But I think with certain subjects, I know I'm prepared to just speak from the heart and just kind
Yeah.
of, I don't know, I get on a bit of a roll. That's why I like you to be involved as well, so you can pull me back at times, because otherwise I talk for days, and that wouldn't be good for anybody. So so yeah, we're talking about stuff that means a lot to us, and hopefully that does come across, and hopefully that excuses the lack of prep sometimes, because maybe it sounds a bit rambly, and we go in different directions and we go off on tangents,
That's
but
what a
it's because,
podcast is. That's what a podcast
well,
is.
yeah, and we're just talking from the heart.
Yes. That's it. No, I
My
think.
last bullet point, anyway, why is
No,
it
no, go.
important to
Yes.
normalize feelings? What do you reckon? Why is it important?
To normalize them, to lift the veil. That was again in my
Mm,
bio. It's lifting the veil and not making it one of those chats where, oh, we mustn't talk about that.
mm,
It it needs to be discussed. It needs to be brought to the forefront. Great example, television 10, 15 years ago, you would not see on the Beeb anything involving drag races or anything involving RuPaul with people creative, well, putting their feelings and putting themselves out there. And 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't see that. Now
mm,
we're embracing the culture. We're embracing LGBTQ plus, which I think is fantastic.
mm,
And as we are recording, it is LGBTQ plus History Month,
mm,
where love is love, and and that's how I go into any attitude of work or any sort of conversation with people. You just listen, you understand them, and going back to the point of why it's important, it's just lifting the veil and making sure that you, as a counsellor, me as someone that works in public services, we just need to be there to help.
Mm,
because there are a lot, especially with lockdown, especially with how everyone feels cooped up. Everyone is being told one thing, and then another thing happens. People are breaching things that they shouldn't be. It's important to retract back and realize that these feelings that you could be going through, whether they be suicidal or just dark thoughts, um, it 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 shouldn't be a taboo anymore.
mm,
It should not be considered taboo. It should be embraced. It should be discussed, and it's coming to the forefront now, where we are seeing people bending the knee. We are seeing people taking a stand. We are seeing people address things that would never have been addressed 10, 15, 20 years ago. And this is within our lifetime, right?
mm,
And it it just comes with education. And that's why, for me, this podcast is a little bit of education with a slight twist of two mates chatting, a
mm.
bit of humor involved. But it is very important to reveal those feelings, because then something can potentially get done, or those discussions could then become normal. Um,
Definitely.
so so that's my rambling about why it's important to keep those feelings out there. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, very much. You're singing from my hymn sheet there. We're a couple of guys just chewing the fat, talking about suicidal feelings, and like it's often said, men don't speak about their feelings. Men can't speak about their feelings. Men have to keep it all bottled up. And I don't think anyone is allowed to talk about suicidal feelings. Men, women, or anyone in
Mm.
between, nobody. It seems to be just completely off the table. And
It's a big
and to
shock,
go,
isn't it? It's a big shock
yeah,
when someone reveals it. It's like, oh, okay.
and
We-
to go back to my early teen years, I was aware of suicide, but I didn't know what it was, and consequently, there weren't these discussions going around the house or the school or anything like that. So consequently, I mean, maybe it's a common feeling, but I was terrified of death,
Mm.
just absolutely terrified for probably a good few years, and also terrified to go to sleep because sleep is similar to death, and suicide is all in there as well. And I think if I was able to have the conversations back then that people are able to have now,
Yeah.
and hopefully we'll be able to have more of, not solely down to this podcast, but we hope to help. I mean, we know we're not going to change the world, but if we can change one person's life, that's great. So if somebody hears this and thinks, well, maybe I will attempt to have a conversation about suicidal feelings, and if that conversation goes well, then like you said, the knowledge is there,
Yeah.
and the taboo goes away, hopefully, and it becomes something that I mean, it will probably always shock because it means exiting the world, and as
It's
humans, we
final.
don't like that. We don't like the concept of that for obvious reasons. But if we can mention it in the same way that depression is
Mm.
fairly normalized now, anxiety is normalized, um, if we can kind of just put it out there and people feel like they're allowed to talk about it, that's something that annoys me mildly when some big event happens, or there's something in the media, and the common reaction is we need to do something about this, we should talk more about this, and
Mm.
then nobody does.
Mm.
And I don't know, that really irritates me. So I feel like we're doing it now. We are doing something, we are talking about it, and we want to take the shame out of feeling certain feelings, and just make it something that can be said without anybody internalizing any of that. I'll give you a quick difference between guilt and shame, by the way. It's a really nice thing. So guilt, I did something bad. I hold my hands up, I take responsibility. Shame, I am bad. And it just eats away and it just carries on. And then you act as a kind of shame magnet. You find different reasons why you should feel ashamed of yourself. And if suicidal feelings are already in the mix, then you have a huge amount of evidence. For the podcast listeners, I'm doing the bunny ear things with
Uh,
my fingers.
Rowan
There's a
is
huge amount of
describing
evidence.
something with bunny ears.
So yeah, you pick up a load of evidence as to why you're more shameful, and we just want to take the shame away. Feel no
No shame.
shame. That's what
Bandwidth.
we want to do.
Yeah, we'll try and do an acapella with that. But no, just going back to the whole idea of shame, where you just said, "I am bad." Are you
Mhm.
bad, really, really bad, and the whole world needs to
Who,
right?
me?
No, it's just a Michael Jackson lyric. I just wanted to try and implicit more songs into the Feel No Shame podcast, but yeah,
Cutting edge references.
that, from the 80s. No, it's been a pleasure, Ro. And I think these are very important times
Mm,
coming up, because when lockdown is lifted, when things return to some sort of normality, the increase of um, young people, or any demographic identifying mental health factors, will shoot through the roof. I believe this glass ceiling, I think there will be a steady increase of, and in a way that's good, because people are identifying it and people are talking, people are identifying the causes. But I do predict that there will be a lot of issues concerning mental health. There already is, but as people
yeah.
return to some sort of normality, the reports will start coming in, and we won't see those facts and figures for at least 6 to 12 months. But it'll be, hopefully this podcast will be the starting venture for someone just turning it on when they've got nothing to do, or they see something new on Spotify or whatever podcast avenue they go down, and they listen. And that's all we want you to do. Listen.
Listen and help out if you can. If you do want to get involved in the podcast in any capacity, it's never too late. Email us on feel no shame pod, pod. Don't say the letters that feel no shame pod at gmail.com, or search for feel no shame pod on Instagram and or Facebook and get in touch with us.
Mm.
We're not a crisis service at all, I should mention that. We will have some numbers coming up at the end on our YouTube version of this podcast. But for brevity here, if you do need to speak to somebody after listening to this podcast, or at any point, any day, any time, please call the Samaritans on 116
Two,
123.
three.
But if you do want to get involved in our podcast, email us or catch up with us on social media. But Alan, do you want to know who's coming up on the pod as
I
well in the future weeks?
I am listening with bated breath.
Okay, well, we have somebody talking to us about the brain and how suicidal feelings come into the neuroscience.
Nice. So my little frontal lobe thing comes into play,
There we
maybe.
go. We've got a musician who's going to be on here, somebody who has used music to deal with her own feelings in the past. We have a poet. We have somebody talking to us about postnatal depression. We have an author. We have somebody willing to talk to us about post-traumatic stress disorder. And we also have some mental health professionals who will help us out with how to respond like a professional to suicidal thoughts and feelings.
You've been
So
busy, and yeah,
they're well,
look at me.
thankfully,
Look at me with my contact list. I'm in awe of the fact that you got more likes on the Facebook than when you were showing your mugshot off. You you got more than me. I was like, oh, all right, right.
well, it's not a competition, but keep liking the photographs, everybody.
It
Well,
is a
if you could
competition.
like and share our stuff, that's great.
Yes. And I mean, any other business? We should have that bit at the end. Any other business?
Okay. Any
AOP.
other business?
Any other business? You got your jab.
I did. I got my vaccination. I got it on Saturday. We're recording this on a Monday. No, it's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
We've been talking for that long. But
Pancake day.
yeah, so that gives you an idea of when I got mine. It was a pre-Valentine's Day treat, my own V-Day, vaccine day. And yes, it was made available to mental health practitioners working in health and social care on the front line, which
Wow.
I do. And so it was a very last minute thing. I think I booked it on the Thursday, um, chilled on Friday, and then had a needle in my arm on Saturday. Um, I can actually thank everybody involved who was volunteering at the Bath racecourse, because it's at the top of a hill and it was -4 degrees
Wow.
because
In
of the
a
wind
tent,
when I
was
went
it?
there, in
Was
a
it in a
big tent, and they were all stood outside and they were all jolly and in good spirits. And I made sure to thank everybody that I saw there. But if I didn't see you, or if you weren't there, and if you are listening to this, thank you so much for everything that you've done in this
Mm.
pandemic, because you've helped save people's lives. But yeah, I got mine, and actually the guy on the desk thought that I said I was a councillor, which is like the political version. And so
Godzilla.
he he picked up the walkie-talkie and was about to turf me out, I think. And then I had to say, no, I mean a therapist, a counsellor. And then he let me through. But yeah, very good,
On
very
your
professional.
side. On your
It's
side.
a couple of side effects the next day, but I ate lots of jelly babies and brownies, and then I was fine. So
Lovely.
that's good. And I'm looking forward to the next one. The next one is the start of May. So by that time, I'll be grand. And I hope everybody else is by then too.
Yeah, it's lovely when you're out and about, when you're dropping things off and going to pick up the shopping, for the main essential reasons why you're outside of your house. But seeing the surgeries and seeing the GP offices being used and queues of people going in, it's lovely. It's just a positive thing to see. But yeah, good luck in May. That's brilliant.
Thank you very much.
You don't feel like you're connecting to Bill Gates or anything like that at all, or
Well, I mean, we hung out anyway,
oh,
and yeah, we're very tight, me and Bill. He didn't want to be on the podcast because I'm making all this up, and I don't know if that's allowed. Am I
oh,
allowed to say I'm friends with Bill Gates? Everybody's friends with Bill Gates.
everyone's got something from Bill Gates. Windows, we look out of and
Doors.
doors. Yeah, no, it's just a joke. It's just what I bring to the podcast. But no, fantastic news that you've got it. And yeah, hopefully the rollout will continue on as quickly and
It
decisively
does
as
seem to be going well. They are
good.
getting a lot of people.
Brilliant.
Any other business from yourself, Al?
Not from me. Just I know. Actually, yes. I noticed on the last podcast that we were just practicing with, I had a bit of a jowl. I was a bit of a. I looked a bit plumpy, and I had a bit of an issue a couple of nights ago, where I fell asleep, and Jade had to constantly wake me up because when I sleep, my mouth goes open, and then apparently I stopped breathing. Quite, and she sent me these things on WhatsApp saying you've got sleep apnea, you can die. And I was there going, oh, okay, got to get back off the bread. And I noticed it on the Feel No Shame practice pod on social media at Feel No Shame pod. I need to do something, and I'm not a spring chicken anymore, and I want to run around with my boy. So yeah, I'm off the carbs for now. Enjoying the cheese and the broccoli and cauliflower with mayonnaise. It's lovely, and a bit of hot sauce. It's absolutely
Joe Wicks?
bit of Joe Wicks. Just watching him helps me. It just helps the mental side of things. It's working my brain. But no, I think let's just see how it goes. Walking around and running a bit more, and yeah, just going from there. But no, that's my business. I want to get a bit thinner, so you might notice a change throughout the episodes. I might get thinner and thinner. I turn to the side and I disappear. But there you go.
Al, I
Mm,
love you just the way you are.
thanks.
Right, let's wrap this up. So we'll be back next time. Thank you for
Yes.
listening. And like I said before, get in touch if you want to get in touch. If you have any ideas or suggestions, or you want to be a guest, or you want to help out in any way, we're always open to listening to people.
And as Rowan has rightly said, the numbers to contact the external partners will come up on the end of this video version of the podcast. There will be an audio version being said if you're listening on other podcasting channels. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. See you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Feel No Shame. We hope you enjoyed it. And remember, if you feel like you need to speak to anybody after listening to this podcast, or at any time, any day, please call the Samaritans on 116 123. Alternatively, please check out the other support services that we recommend at the end of our YouTube videos. Music is by Adobe. I've been Rowan Long with Alan Aldersley Byrne. Thank you for listening, and join us next time for more of the same.